Okay, this is also going to be a very short video. This is actually the same model, but presented in a completely different way. Okay, but behind this is essentially the same model. So what have we got here? We've got a graph with time here. I'm not specifying the number of years or whatever, and just some scale here, a linear scale. And GDP is growing exponentially, okay? So that's what this curve is. But the price of petrol is staying the same. And according to this idea, the price of driving a car 1 kilometer using petrol is also staying the same, according to this. Okay, that might not strictly be true if engines are getting more efficient, but whatever. We'll assume that that's the case. So the price of driving a car using unleaded petrol is staying the same. Okay. And the price of driving a car using leaded petrol is also staying the same, but it's lower. Okay, why is that? Well, that's why we add the lead to the petrol that we used to. Because you could then run the engines in a different way. I won't go into the physics of it or the chemistry. But you could basically get more bang for your buck, or more bang for your liter of petrol if you stuck lead in it as well. So your cost per kilometer driven was somewhat lower, okay? So by sticking lead in the petrol, you're saving petrol costs. And that gap here, that's the cost premium, that's this red line. That height here is the same as the gap. But what about the damage caused by the lead? Well, the physical damage, you might say, well, that's the same. You emit a kilo of lead to the atmosphere in 1930 or a kilo of lead to the atmosphere in 1980. Well, that should have the same effect, right? But the difference is that in 1980, we're much richer than we were in 1930. So if you remember this trade-off, yeah, in 1980, our consumption is out here somewhere, whereas in 1930, it was back here. So in 1930, it's like, oh, a bit of lead pollution, yeah, we'll take it for cheaper petrol. But when we're a lot richer, for the same diminishment in environmental quality, we're like, nah, we want to move up. We don't want to move to the right at all costs. We want to move up and to the right, yeah, once we got richer. So the willingness to pay for environmental quality tends to rise in line with GDP. So this is also an exponential rise. And of course, in optimal policy, when the willingness to pay exceeds the cost premium, the willingness to pay to avoid the lead emissions from adding it to the petrol, when that exceeds the cost premium or the cost saving, if you like, from adding it to the petrol, then we should ban it, right? And that's more or less what happened. Except, when did it actually get banned? I'm not sure anyone's ever really done the work, but it seems pretty clear to me, if you look at some of the literature, that it wasn't here. It was like here somewhere. The damages to people's health, kids' intelligence and brain development, measured in monetary terms, were way, way higher than any benefits in saved fuel when we finally got around to banning lead. Okay. The cost premium of going green stays constant over time. The willingness to pay for the environmental benefit rises with GDP. The willingness to pay needs to be converted into a price of emitting pollution. The price can take different forms, including emissions taxes, but more often than not, simple bans on certain technologies. So we just banned in the 80s and 90s, depending on what country you're in, we just banned the idea of adding lead to petrol. Like, this is crazy, you're poisoning our kids, you know. Cheap technologies are favored at low incomes, clean at high incomes. With continued growth and optimal policies, more and more dirty technologies will be replaced. So putting the carbon into that perspective, the change to low carbon is only a question of time. Why do I say only? Well, if you believe in tipping points, or if you're concerned about the low probability disastrous outcomes, maybe those will have happened before, or we'll pass those tipping points before we get round to cutting carbon emissions seriously. And of course, we know from this example, or I argued at least from this example, that this was kind of the case for lead, that we only stopped adding lead to petrol way after the time when the damages from lead were way much bigger than the costs. Okay, so we don't have a great track record. There are lots of examples where we have acted, but typically you could argue in most of those cases we should have acted much earlier. Okay, so I think I'll stop that video there, and then there'll be just one short one summing up.